Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very timely topic and two experts. We are grateful to Senator Menendez and Senator Booker for having their staff spend time with us today to discuss the congressionally directed spending process and provide us with highlights of projects that received funding in the past two cycles. We have with us today John Butchko. Did I get that right, John?
Butchko,
I apologize, who works on appropriations and congressional direct spending requests in office of Senator Menendez. John has been with Senators Washington, D.C. staff since 2014. His portfolio includes budget, appropriations, Homeland Security, Veterans, and Armed Services. Also joining us today is Caitlin McGinnis, who is a senior project specialist in Senator Booker's office. She has been with Senator Booker in his Newark office since 2013. In addition to congressionally directed spending, her portfolio includes housing, poverty, labor, agriculture, nutrition, and women's issues. Again, thank you for joining us both today, and I'm going to turn it over to you so we can begin the presentation.
Great. John, do you want me to start it off and you can jump in with whatever I forget?
sounds good.
So we just want to start with the caveat that this guidance we're providing today is based off of the most current information we've received from the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is subject to change, not only this year, but in future years. So most of you are probably familiar with the congressionally directed spending process, but I'll just go through it briefly for those of you who are not. There are 12 appropriation subcommittees, and all but 3 of them are accepting congressionally directed spending requests within the Senate this year for funding. So each subcommittee funds CDS requests through one or more budgetary accounts, and each of these accounts have their own specific requirements. So you can find detailed guidance for each of the subcommittees and accounts on our website. And John and I are going to walk through today a couple of accounts that we think are most applicable for units of government in New Jersey, our towns and counties, and include a few examples of projects that we were able to get funded in previous years. So once Senator Booker and Senator Menendez make their requests, they will be reviewed by the relevant appropriations subcommittee, and some of those requests will then be selected. Not all projects will be chosen. There is an overall cap on the amount of CDS projects that can be included in the budget. And the process in which appropriations bills are considered and finalized and signed into law can take several months. So we just wanted to make you all aware that this is quite a long process.
Yes, and I would say last year we started receiving requests around April, and it was not until a few days before Christmas that the final appropriations bill for this fiscal year was signed into law. So there's no indication. It could be, it's different every year, but that is just something to keep in mind, is that it can be a bit of a process.
Yeah, it's possible there's people on the line right now who did receive funding on the last fiscal year in the last round, but who have not yet gotten their funding. Basically, once the appropriations bill passes, the committees alert the relevant federal agencies that a project has been funded, and those agencies will reach out to the recipient to sort of enter into the process of creating a project agreement, which can take quite some time. And we also just want to flag that all CDS funding is contingent upon the enactment of fiscal year 24 appropriations bills. So, even if your project is chosen by Senator Menendez or Senator Booker, even if it's chosen by the Appropriations Committee, you are not over the finish line until an appropriation bill is enacted and signed into law.
And we can never guarantee that any specific project will be funded.
Correct. So we do have some FAQs on our website with more information that I think Paul may have shared with everyone. And we'll have some time to cover questions today, but if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I think Paul has shared all our email addresses as well. We also have examples of projects that were funded in the last 2 years on our website, and we're going to go through a couple of those, but that can be helpful to get a sense of sort of the type and scope of projects that have previously been selected. We do recommend applying to both of your senators and your House member to give your project as many opportunities for consideration as possible. For our office, we recommend limiting your request to no more than 3, just so your requests aren't in too much competition with each other. And I'll just flag that the deadline for both our offices is the same day, Friday, March 17th. John, I'm sure I left plenty out there.
I think we can, I think we can get going.
All right, great. Paul, I think you have our PowerPoint, right?
We do, Caitlin. Just give me a moment. We're going to share. Give me one moment here. While I'm going through the technical difficulties here, sharing my screen, I do want to let folks know that we'll be able to ask questions at the end. We're going to have the ability to put your question in the chat screen, and you will we will ask your questions from the chat screen. Bear with me one second.
So before we get started, I think, one piece of general advice, regardless of your project, is err on the side when you submit your request to both Senator Menendez and Senator Booker, err on the side of giving too much information. Go into as much detail as possible, because the subcommittees are going to be going through a lot of requests, and it's much easier to just give them as much information that they need on the front end. Otherwise, they'll have to come back to us, and we'll have to come back to you. So as much detail as you can go into when you submit the requests on either or on both of our websites, that would be appreciated.
Okay, and if I did it right, you should be seeing the screen now.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, Lori. So the subcommittee on transportation, housing, and urban development, also known as THUD, also known as THUD, is where a very large number of our projects were funded last year. And these are some of the sub-accounts that, I think were most successful. John, do you want to walk us through a couple of these?
Sure. And I think one thing to note is that for pretty much any transportation project within THUD, that's transportation, housing, and urban development, there is going to be some sort of cost share requirement that will be linked to the underlying grant program that the funding comes from. So right here, you can see a couple of examples that we have. We have highway infrastructure programs, which deals, you can see our offices were able to get funded was $2.6 million to South Brunswick for construction and equipment for improvements to a signalized intersection.
And then there are the transit infrastructure grants account. And that is basically for transit projects that are eligible under Chapter 53 of Title 49 of the United States Code. And an example of one that got funded last year is $1.5 million for Woodbridge for electric shuttle buses to facilitate access to their downtown. And I will note some of these are quite large. These are probably at the larger end of the projects that we were able to get funded last year. So, we do have smaller projects as well, sort of in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And we have another one there for highway infrastructure that went to Hudson County. Below that, you can see EDI, which are economic development initiatives. Now, this is a broader category. Generally speaking, these are for projects that are intended to benefit people with low to moderate income levels. So it's good from the standpoint that it's the eligibility criteria is very broad. The challenge with that is because it's so broad, it receives the biggest number of requests. So the competition for this particular one is much bigger than I think practically any other in THUD, and I think maybe even in among any subcommittee.
Yeah, this is one of the only accounts that'll fund construction. So we do get quite a number of requests here. And like John said, we'll be asking you for sort of specific information about the income level of your municipality that the committee requires. So we have some external guidance for this account that we've prepared. So I'll just drop it in the chat at this link. I think it's been shared already, just so everyone has it to hand. And then maybe we can go on to the next slide for the next subcommittee. Thanks, Lori. So this one's Subcommittee on Interior Environment and Related Agencies. For the most part, the subcommittees here that will be of interest to towns are going to be the clean water and drinking water accounts. Those have quite a number of eligibility requirements, but can be used for sort of drinking water infrastructure programs and projects like the two that you see here that got funded. 600,000 for Cape May for drinking water treatment plant expansion, and Rahway received $1 million for a lead service line replacement project. Before we move on.
So there, one thing to note about, anything that deals with the drinking, anything that deals with the drinking water and interior, there is at least a 20% cost share requirement.
Yes, and I'm gonna drop this guidance in the chat too that has more information on that. And one that we didn't put here, but recently came to my attention is there is also an account under this subcommittee for forestry, which I don't believe we had any projects funded under last year, but apparently can be used for sort of urban tree planting and other forest projects. So might be worth taking a look at. And we can go on to the next slide. Thanks, Lori. So commerce, justice, science is mainly going to be of assistance for police departments in your town. These cannot be used for construction projects, but they can be used for, equipment and training and other things like that.
And one thing to note here is you cannot specify a certain brand of equipment that you want to buy. So when you fill out your request, only specify the equipment you're going to get, but we can't specify which brand it's going to be.
And I'll drop that guidance here. And then we can go to the next slide. Okay, and then for Homeland Security, they only have 2 accounts. This pre-disaster mitigation and emergency operations center. As you can see, this was, I think, our largest project that was funded last year, 10 million for North Wildwood seawall expansion. And then Carteret got $1 million for renovation and expansion of an OEM building. And let me just find that guidance. And I'll just flag that both of these accounts, I believe, have to be accompanied by a letter of support by the appropriate state agency affirming that it is eligible for funding. So you'll see a place in our application to submit that letter. John, did you have anything else, or next slide?
We can move on.
Okay, so agriculture has very specific requirements on what is considered rural. Most of their projects are, towns are only eligible if they're considered rural. That said, their requirements can be a little complex, having to do with population and other factors. So, some towns that you may think wouldn't be eligible are, and vice versa. The 2 accounts within that subcommittee that we saw the most projects funded for towns were the community facilities grants, So that can be used for construction, to construct community facilities and other activities. You see the Clayton Fire Department was able to purchase a new ladder truck. Mount Holly was able to renovate a municipal courthouse facility. They also have a natural resources conservation service account, which West Caldwell used for stream desnagging. I will flag that ag has a lot of cost sharing requirements, and those are staggered based on a number of factors, including population and the income level of your town. And
that-
also,
I'm
sorry, Joe.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Caitlin.
And also this committee this year has asked us to confirm that potential applicants have been in touch with the local rural development office to confirm that they are eligible before submitting an application. So our application does include contact information for those folks, but that's just something to keep in mind.
And as far as community facilities go, the request will only be considered by the subcommittee for towns with populations under 20,000 and under. And as Caitlin said, there are requirements of how much of the project, what percentage of the project can be funded by CDS. The guidance they gave us is that the program can fund up to 75% when the project is located in a community having a population of 5,000 or less. It can cover a maximum of 55% for a community having a population of 12,000 or fewer, and 35% for a population of 20,000 or fewer, and over 20,000%, unfortunately, not eligible for this program.
I think that's our last subcommittee. So we can take questions now if there are any.
Actually, I have a question. I'm Veronica LeRae from the Township of Lacey. You just put up that last slide with regards to rural development, agricultural. Is that different from the USDA Rural Development Grant opportunity that has a lunch and learn on March 16?
So I imagine that will be about the competitive grant opportunities from USDA. So, for all of these grants, they're mostly based on existing grant programs that the various agencies have. Some of them amend them somewhat for congressionally directed spending. Like, for example, certain ones won't have matching agreements for CDS. Ag is not one of those. They do retain those matching requirements. And I think that the eligibility standards are very similar to their competitive USDA rural development grant opportunities. The only difference is that, you would have to apply through their competitive process through USDA and be funded. And when you apply to us and if we were to select your project for funding and the committee were to select it for funding and it was signed into law, that funding is appropriated. So, you're guaranteed that funding, just sort of pending going through all the requirements that ag has.
This would just give me another opportunity, obviously, if I have a more important project that I'd rather put through the congressional, and then this other opportunities to do the fire truck through the USDA rural.
Yeah, I think that's, at your discretion, how you want to split that up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin and John, for the presentation. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, and so go ahead and put them in now. I will plug next Thursday at noon. We have a lunch and learn with Jana Celta, who is the New Jersey State Director of USDA Rural Development. So if you have not signed up for that, please go to our website and do that. The first question is from Gilbert. We had hoped to apply for a Homeland Security grant last year for new generators for our police department and municipal building, which houses our OEM. We were unable to find out who in the OEM state agency we should contact to get a letter of support. Can you please provide us with that information? Gilbert, if you want to contact us at the league, separately, we're happy to put you in touch with the right contacts there. Caitlin and John, I don't know if you have anything to add specifically to that question, but we're happy to connect you with OEM here in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah.
And next question, also from Gilbert, is a resolution from the Township Committee required for submission of an application?
No, you don't need a resolution.
Also, would it make sense to submit a project for which we have just applied for a recycling infrastructure grant?
I think we usually encourage people to apply for it as many different sources of funding as possible, just because the CDS process is so competitive and so long. We certainly do recommend that you also apply for competitive grant funding in addition.
I would agree with that. It's, we never know what this, at the end of the day, we can never guarantee the subcommittee will fund a project. So I echo what Caitlin just said.
Great, thank you. I should also take this opportunity to let all of our participants know that this is the process for the Senate side of the Congress. The House has begun rolling out their application process, and we've been in touch with most of the congressional offices. And once we have links for their application process, we will we'll send a communication out to our membership. There has been some guidance that individual members have shared that is different from the last few years on the House side. There are not going to be any projects considered for the Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education subcommittees. No funds can be used for for-profit recipients, and each project must apply to a specific federal spending account. Those are some of the broad guidance, including a prohibition on funding for museums, commemorations, memorials, healthcare facilities, swimming pools, etc. But stay tuned, we'll have more guidance on the House side of the projects once we receive them from the majority of the offices. So next question is, what is the match for bulkhead replacement under Homeland Security Subcommittee? Oh, Caitlin, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So that's probably a better question to email, and I'll put my email in the chat. But if you look in the guidance for Homeland Security, you'll see the full requirements for the pre-disaster grant program, and that should include matching. But if that's not clear, please follow up and we can clarify with the committee.
Great, thank you very much. Question from Andrew. Is this funding the same program that we would apply directly to our congressional district for? Do we submit the same project for both our senators and our congressmen?
So the House members call it something different. Sorry, what is it, John? It's community
Project spending. Yeah, something like
community
that.
project funding. And like Paul just went through, they actually have a number of sort of very different guidelines from us this year, but basically both the House and the Senate are going to be taking requests for congressionally directed spending or community projects funding, and they will be each independently working through their internal processes, with their appropriations committees to see which projects are eligible and which they want to fund. And then somewhere down the line, it'll be time to sort of combine the House and Senate spending bills. And at that time, we will come up with a final combined bill.
Right, and I think I think generally speaking, is certainly we encourage anybody who applies in Senator Menendez's office to also apply to Senator Booker, so that way we can both take a look at the project.
And I would just also encourage, if you're applying to multiple offices, to use the exact same name for the project with every office. So when it comes to do that combining, we can say, yes, these are both the same project easily.
Great, thank you very much. Can you list off the 9 subcommittees that are accepting applications?
It's like the lightning round on a quiz
Yeah.
show.
Yeah,
And
we're
this
getting
is
close to
on our
Final
website
Jeopardy.
too, but just so you don't feel like you have to desperately take notes, if you go to booker.senate.gov/appropriations, you'll see them all, but there's a subcommittee on agriculture, subcommittee on commerce, justice, science, subcommittee on energy and water, subcommittee on financial services and general government, subcommittee on homeland security, subcommittee on interior, environment and related agencies, subcommittee on labor, health and human services and education, and subcommittee on transportation, housing and urban development.
Thank you for that, Caitlin. This question may be answered during our rural development webinar next Lunch and Learn next week, but how for the rural development grants, are there also income thresholds?
I believe that, John, am I right that some of the matching requirements have income tied to them?
I would need to double check that.
And we'll be able to address that next week in our USDA rural development webinar as well. So so stay tuned for an answer to that question. Next question from Mike. How close to shovel ready does a project request have to be detailed / final plans, state and federal approvals, permits in hand, construction, bidding, or initial concepts, or something in between?
It's a really good question. You know, like we said, this can be a very protracted process. So, you know, sometimes if a project is ready to go tomorrow, but CDS funding won't be secured even potentially for several months, you know, that may not be the best course for a town. That said, we do want to see that it can be reasonably accomplished in the fiscal year that it'll be funded in. Although for the most part, that year will start when the applicant signs the project agreement with the agency. And just to keep in mind that for some of these accounts, you know, you cannot be reimbursed for activities that have already happened before the money was appropriated. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is, and this is probably not a great answer, but it depends on the specific nature of the project. Even within the specific subcommittees, the different funds within the different funding mechanisms within within THUD all have their own specific guidelines and requirements on how long down the road the project must be completed. So I think it would be better, and Caitlin and I think are both leaving our contact info. If you have questions about a specific project, feel free to reach out. Be happy to look into it.
Yeah, and for some of these like transportation accounts, for example, like your project needs to be already included in a state plan or have a letter in hand from the state agency that says like, we'll include it on our next state plan. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you both very much. I'm reviewing the chat, but I believe that we have caught up on the questions. So if there are any further questions, please get them in the chat so we can try and get them answered for you. Otherwise, I think, oh, here we go. From Mona in Pennington. The bulk funding for drinking water line seems to be related to lead service line. Does the DWSRF also support aging water lines? This was not quite clear to me.
This might be a better one to discuss offline, but the guidance is quite extensive from Interior on those two accounts. So I would just take a look through those and see if that's helpful, and if not, please reach out to us and we can discuss it more in depth. I also just want to respond. I think I saw someone earlier in the chat say, can the same project be awarded on both sides? Yes, it can be chosen by the House subcommittee and the Senate subcommittee. And then when it comes time to sort of conference those bills, those will be combined into one project.
Yeah, and something to note is that the Senate and the House are kind of working independent of each other when they choose which projects to fund. So.
Great. Well, I think we're up to, oh, here we go. Let's see. Would any of you be able to answer a 2023 appropriation award question from Perth Amboy OCED?
Yes, probably we've gotten quite a number of questions about last year's projects. But if it's very specific, maybe we'll take it offline, but happy to hear what it is. And I'll put my email here now too.
Right.
There we go.
Great. So Caitlin and John have both provided their email in the chat. We'll follow up with an email to participants with the links that they've provided, as well as their contact information. And on behalf of the league, I just want to say thank you to both John and Caitlin for participating today in very short order. We've been communicating pretty fiercely over the last week, and they've been fantastic in their availability. So I just want to say thank you, and wanted to turn it over to each of you to see if you had any final words.
One last thing that just comes to mind before we say goodbye is this. I think this is just broad advice that I've heard from a number of the different subcommittees, is when you're placing your request, be as specific as you can be, especially with the budgeting aspect of it. This much money is going for this much is going for that, and also include if you've received funding from any other source in the past. And there's a spot in our form that indicates where to do that. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. I think Caitlin would say the same thing. I'm happy to be a resource for you.
Yep.
Great. Lori, do you have any final words?
No, I just want to again thank John and Caitlin from Senator Booker's and Menendez's office for joining us today and providing us with them useful information on how towns can apply for this funding. We urge towns to take advantage of this opportunity. Look at your projects you have coming forth and seeing what would be a good fit. The material, as Paul has said, we'll send it out to individuals. We'll send out to you all the links they provided, that John and Caitlin have provided, and you'll be able to view this if you have any questions, or any of your colleagues couldn't make the lunch and learn. It's available for on demand on the league's website. So we thank you, and hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you.